So the album's called Fall Together Again, and I have to credit that to my wonderful manager Terry Hall. It's from a Steely Dan song, and there's a few songs on the record that feature the word fall and again, possibly together, but definitely fall and again. And I think it just it made sense to have a title that kind of brought those things together, and it also kind of feels a little bit like the way that the album's come about and the various people that have been involved, and it just seemed fitting, and I love it. I think it's a great it sounds like an album title to me. So Fall Together Again. So the record starts with a track called Derwin. It's an instrumental, and it's called Derwin because the house that we recorded in was called Bryn Derwin, and I quite liked it I liked the idea of there being something on the record that was sort of geographically referenced, The first track on the album, or the first track with words, track 2, is called As Good As Gone, which is a song that I wrote here on this very piano. You should behold that sight. I was writing with George Ezra, potentially for his record that's now out, that I actually didn't end up writing any songs on, but it was nice to spend some time with George, and it was those chords I had kicking around, and I played them to him, and because I was really excited about them at the time, just the chords, and he kind of dug them, but we ended up veering off on some other idea, and I was pretty pleased about that because it then ended up turning into the song that is now As Good As Gone, and it's got a big drum beat in it that I actually sneaked the drum beat in. I was writing a piece of music with Ilan Eshkeri, who I did the Snowman thing with, and we had a drum kit set up, and Ilan went to make a cup of tea, and we hadn't got any studio time booked in at that point, and so whilst Ilan had gone to get a cup of tea, I got the engineer to whack 2 mics up, and in the space of 10 minutes we just did all the drums, and I sent them to Mike, and then he edited them together, and we took them with us to Bryn Derwin, which I thought was quite fun. You always hope that there might be a song that comes in the middle of recording an album. 1, because you fear you haven't got enough songs, and 2, just because it's quite nice to feel. It's quite nice to feel when you're recording that you haven't lost the kind of the writing spark. So we were sat having breakfast one morning, me and Stu, and I had this. Oh, and there was a map. That's right, above my bed in the little cottage. There was a map. I don't know, of a city and a coast, probably something like that. And then it just started going around in my head when I was having a shower or something. I was singing "City, the coast, most the toast." Da, na, 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 na. Yeah, it just went from there. But it was one of those songs that you always hope for. 1, it came in the middle of the album recording, which was great, and 2, it just came in 10 minutes. And those ones don't happen very often. So it's quite nice to have one of them at that late point. So that City Coast is City Coast. City to Coast. The bit in the middle with the piano read, it sounds a bit like, or I want it to sound, or I imagine it sounds a bit Ben Foldsy or something. It's the first and only bit of piano playing I've ever done that sounds like I can play the piano, which I'm quite chuffed with. But anyway, that bit is linked to Derwin, which opens the album, and they're supposed to be linked, even though they're in 2 different places on the record. They're linked because they're the same chord pattern underneath. But I'm going off on a nerdy tangent here, but so All This I Heard Before was written in 2 parts. The chorus was one thing that I was kind of like playing around with in sound checks, and a couple of people were like, "Oh, that sounds cool, that sounds like a pop song." And then the middle was another bit that was being used for both Derwin and whatever this was. And then I guess they ended up kind of like over time marrying and becoming this, this whole song. I think it's a song that was written because I was living in New York at the time when I wrote a lot of these. That's a song that kind of like, ended up being written in a sound check in Holland, and bits of it being written in Brooklyn. So I feel like it's quite an international song. You Won't Find Love is a song that I definitely wrote when I was living in New York. And I had only one hand that was fully sort of functional, because this hand I'd stuck a glass through, so there's no way of working this hand. So I was doing a few weeks working with Chris Abanovich, who obviously used to play in Editors. He lives over there, and he was around the corner, and he's obviously a brilliant guitarist, and he's got a bunch of equipment, and I had no way of doing much because I was pretty much writing songs with one hand. So I'd go around to his house every day, and I'd take him the ideas that I've got, and he'd help me play things with the other hand, and it was quite funny, sort of funny one-handed arrangement. And this is one of the songs that I kind of started demoing around at his flat, and at the time it was pretty much an entirely different song. In that it had some other bits in it that I had, and it wasn't sure of itself in terms of how it should be played and arranged. And I got back, when we got back to London, I was going through, before we went to Brindle, and I was going through all the various bits of demos I had, and I heard the one that me and Chris did, and there were a couple of bits in it that just stood out, and so I just took these 2 bits out of 6 and plonked them together and made a song. It's kind of cool when that happens. It's kind of cool when you've got like a bunch of different ideas from which you pull a couple and put them together. At first that's weird. At first that doesn't kind of sit. It doesn't sound perhaps right, because it's 2 separate things. But that was every song anybody writes, I guess there's a completely different method behind it. Some songs just write themselves. Some songs you kind of you slave over time, and some songs like this one, you kind of put together like a jigsaw. So that was this one. But then lyrically, it kind of it happened in one piece, and it means a lot. So there's another one that I wrote in New York, and it was another one that it sort of flowed and sort of came quite swiftly. And those songs are always quite telling, because it's almost a reassurance if a song comes like in that way. Other songs you have to work harder at. You're constantly having to sort of either convince yourself or tell yourself that you're doing the right thing and you're going in the right direction. Whereas the ones that come, in a sort of flowing, more flowing, easy flowing manner, they're almost like kind of a self reassurance. This song must be working because it's right in itself. Yeah, it's quite nice when you end up doing it's quite nice when you end up working on songs on tour, because it makes you feel like you've done something worthwhile with your day, as opposed to just sound checking and then going straight to the pub. And this was one of those. This was one of those ones that started humming. The melody to the chorus was the first thing that came, and it came about just after a sound check, and I started singing it, and I had the See a Girl bit. And I remember Steve Clark, who plays bass in my band, saying, Steve doesn't sort of dish out compliments lightly, and he just turned around and he was like, "That's fucking good. What's that?" And I immediately was like, "Is it? Oh, cool. Great, Steve likes it. I'll go and carry on." So I just went back to the dressing room and carried on. Came back to when we moved back to London. I went and demoed it with Pat Collier, and it basically just had these 2 choruses and me. And it was one of the first demos I'd ever tried doing that just had me going, "Yes, no, just my God, and then taking it home and listening to the old bit and going, "Oh, that sounds cool. How can I make some real words out of that?" It's quite a new technique that I'm gonna get into. But just endless verses of wordless nonsense. Tom Smith is a huge reason as to why this song has ended up being something special, and being something that's, for me, really central to the album. And actually that really kick-started the writing process, because obviously whenever you come to writing a new album or something, you're like, I don't know whether I've got any songs, I don't know if I've got any ideas, and this song was kicking around, and Tom had injected some new life into it. And so then it was really sweet when we were in Brindle and we were recording, and he said that he'd really love to come and sing his vocal on it, which was great. So we got in the car and he drove 5 hours to come and see us in our little cabin, and sang an incredible vocal, which is wonderful. It's probably the best part about the song. So that's Watch Me Fall Again. Hearts and Minds is another an older song which I wrote around the same time as Watch Me Fall Again, which is actually on my I Am Arrow's record in a different guise. But I started playing it live when we were a touring company. I started playing it live just on my own with Stu, my drummer, singing backing vocals at the end, and it just sort of ended up being part of the set that, you know, started to feel quite magical. And often people come up after the show and be like, "What was that song?" And I'd say it was on this other album, and no one had heard of it and all this. So I think it asked to be re-recorded, and so we did that, and I think it just ended up really sitting really well with the other songs, and finding quite a natural place on this record. When Your Ship Comes In was the only song on the album that sort of halfway through recording I was like, this song's not gonna make the album. I just couldn't write any words. I was lying in bed at Brynderwen for fear of our lives because there'd been a hurricane that wouldn't stop, the kind of 4-week-long hurricane that rocked Bethesda in North Wales. Just that was keeping me awake. But also the other thing that was keeping me awake was the fact that I couldn't write any bloody lyrics for this song, which I'd had kicking around for a while, but I just couldn't write the verse lyrics because it's quite a fast-moving song and it's got like quite a rolling piano part that needs the lyrics to kind of like bounce off, and I just couldn't come up with it. And it was great. It was a really great exercise in kind of like forcing yourself to be at a point where you've got to. Because I think I recorded it up. The band loved it. Steve, the bass player especially, was like, "Oh, this song's my favourite." And I was like, "Oh, do you have any lyrics?" But I couldn't bring myself to admit to the band I didn't have any lyrics. I was like, "Yeah, it'd be cool. I'll come in and breakfast, and then we'd do breakfast, and then I'd be like, yeah, you know, it's more of a tea time song or whatever." And then it'd be tea time. We'd be like, "Oh, we shouldn't record this song this week because it's just not the right, you know, the weather's not right." And then it got to the point where I was like, "Okay, we're going to go home and we're not going to have this song. It does sound brilliant." And you know, woke up one morning and just had it. And again, like I was saying before, that's always the most exciting thing. Either when something flows and comes easily, or when you're just up against it to the point of embarrassment, and it just presents itself neatly before you have to dismantle everything and go home. And that's what happened. And it's probably my favourite song on the album. You know, with a chorus like "Don't Be Gone Too Long," it ran the risk of being a bit too, you know, gushy. Is that a word that you use for, like, you know, soppy? Is that yeah? Yeah, it ran the risk of being a little bit, you know, overly soppy and a bit, you know. But I think we talked a lot about musically trying to get the song just right and trying to marry it with exactly the right vibe and feel. And obviously also sing it with the right feeling too, because I think as long as it was a believable thing, it would be a beautiful love song as opposed to some sort of some gushing, overly soppy thing that nobody else need hear. Somebody sort of screaming that they don't want someone to be going too long. It's also what I always used to say to my dad when my dad used to always. I just always remember us driving places in the car. I mean, my dad was a doctor, so he did used to have to go on home visits and stuff, and we'd sit in the car and we'd wait for him to go. And that was one thing that used to scare me. And I remember him saying, I think I just used to always say, don't be gone too long," you know, in a real worried voice. But I just always remember us going to like weird places out in the middle of nowhere, and we just stop, and then Dad would go and look at a steam train for 3 hours, and we'd sort of wait in the car. Okay, so here are my co-stars for the track by track to Watch Me Fall Again. No, that's the song. So here's my co-stars for the album track by track. This is Silky the Tortoise and Lily the Yappy Dog. So there you go, guys. You've been wanting to be involved. You can now do your thing. Why don't you show them what you're made of?